Okay, so basically, my approach to morality is to try to dissect it, right? So first, you got to make observations, find some patterns, and then try to understand where those patterns came from to get to like the root, the origin of morality. See if you can like understand attributes about its origin, and then once you understand the entire nature of morality, then you can kind of have a lot more to say. So, what is the nature of morality? You've got all these different cultures, different kingdoms, different eras. There's moral disagreement. There's different perspectives. Some people think this is good, and other people think this is bad, right? Okay, so that's interesting. Why would that be the case? Well, are there any universal patterns? Yes, there have been discovered across 66 cultures. There's like at least 7 moral principles that seem relatively consistent cross culturally. Okay, that's interesting. Is there any difference between universal morality and a local morality, right? Why would some principles be universal and others not be universal? Well, it seems like the principles that are most reliably beneficial to society are universal, and the principles that are less likely to they're more context dependently beneficial to society, those are more local. So that kind of points us in the direction of morality is basically it's aiming at social good, right? And so if the social good is context dependent, then morality becomes context dependent. But if the social good is universal, then morality is universal. And since the social good encompasses both domains, some aspects of social good are universal, like not murdering people, and other aspects of social good are not universal, like basically healthcare type, like diet type stuff. Okay, so now that we know that it's aiming towards social good, that gives us a clue about its goal. But like, where does that goal come from? Where does this morality come from? And so, like, we have to understand that basically evolutionary forces are basically deciding, in the loose sense of the phrase, they're deciding what is good and what is bad. So basically, any type of culture could evolve, any type of morality could evolve in theory, but basically, natural selection is a filter on the ones that actually work. And so basically, all the types of morality that fail to help the society exist disappear because the nature of not existing is disappearance. So basically, all of the cultures that exist include within them principles that allow the culture to continue to exist. Okay, so now we're starting to connect social good connects to existence, right? Okay, so basically, evolution boils down to existence. Natural selection boils down to existence. We reproduce so that things exist. We survive so that things exist. And if you don't care about existence, then you cease to exist. So everything that exists, by default, de facto, cares about existence. So that's where philosophic thrownness comes into play. I forget which philosopher talks about thrownness, but I really like this concept. It's kind of this idea that when we're born, we're kind of thrown into a situation. Like we don't have a choice over our environment. We don't have a choice over our parents. We don't have a choice over our genetics. We are just like basically thrown into a situation that we have to deal with. And basically, I bring this into the domain of morality, and I say, hey, as living creatures, we're thrown into the game of life, right? So you could think about being thrown into the game of life as similar to being thrown into the game of chess, right? If you are thrown into the game of chess, guess what? The goals of the game become your goals, right? So now you are subject to those goals. And so those goals become operational upon you because you are already inside the game of chess. So that the same with the game of life. Once you are thrown into life, you adopt and basically are forced to have all of the goals of life. And the goals of life include existence at every layer of analysis, mostly. So that kind of takes away the arbitrariness. Lots of people like to say, "Well, morality is arbitrary. Like everyone gets to pick their goals and like we build different moral systems based on whichever goals we pick. Like, no, there's no free will and you don't get to pick your goals. Your goals are built into your biology, they're built into your instincts. So you are forced to play out the goals that you already have. And that is the foundation of your morality. And that is based on existence based principles. Because if you didn't have existence based principles, you wouldn't exist. You wouldn't be in the game. So once you boil morality down to the goal of existence, then you have the understanding that you can judge every moral theory against the principle of existence. You can say, which culture promotes existence better? That's kind of in principle, in theory, that's a calculatable question, right? Um, a society that murders everyone versus a society that doesn't murder everyone, it's kind of an obvious that one exists better than the other. But you can play that out and it gets more and more complicated as the variables become more and more complicated. And that's why there's lots of moral disagreement. We all have existence based principles, but no one is exactly sure how to exist best. They're like, does the Christian strategy of birthing lots of babies and teaching them to be like obedient slaves, is that the best strategy for existence? Or is neoliberalism, where everyone has individual nature and everyone gets to follow their dreams, and is that the best strategy? Or is like wokeism, where it's like radical creation of your own identity and respect for all identities? I mean, there's multiple strategies. People are debating which one actually promotes existence the best. And well-being is a metric for measuring existence, right? Like if you are starving, you have negative well-being. That means you are going to cease to exist. But if you have positive well-being, that is sometimes or often an indicator that you are not about to cease to exist. The things are working. So that's how it ties into Sam Harris's paradigm, is that evolution uses well-being as a metric for existence, right? So evolution says, hey, if you eat something, ding, 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 you increased your existence points. And if you cut yourself, it's like, you hurt your existence points. And like evolution is this game of increasing your existence points and not decreasing them. And that's pleasure and pain. Evolution uses well being as the language of the point based system in the game of life. So basically, well-being is a good barometer for existence-based morality. But evolution is encoding us with well-being based parameters, right? So, what's a good example of this? Basically, evolution can be wrong, right? So basically, evolution learns from the past. So evolution says, well, in the past, being religious and making lots of babies, that was a great strategy. So it still is, right? But it's like, well, actually, like the environment changes, and like when the environment changes, your strategy has to change. And old strategies, maybe they're good in the older context, but they're bad in the new context. And so evolution might not always be perfect at calculating exactly what the best strategy is. So it's like we have to be slightly skeptical of our evolutionary well-being programming to the extent that evolution might be wrong. So basically, to the extent that our environment matches our evolutionary history, we can trust our moral instincts on well-being. But to the extent we're in a novel environment, we have to trust our prefrontal cortexes, and we might have to override some of our baser instincts. So to the word supervene, supervene is a nice philosophic term that basically is like basically describing a philosophic linkage. Super means above. Um, Basically, supervene means that. So you could say phenomenon A supervenes on phenomenon B, and what that would mean is that they're phenomenologically linked. I'm not talking about consciousness. I'm talking about just they're ontologically linked, such that changes in phenomenon B create changes in phenomenon A. Um, yes, so you could say phenomenon A could be molecules, phenomenon B could be atoms, right? You can say there's a phenomenon called molecule. So molecule supervenes on atoms. If you change the atoms, you change the molecule, right? So it's conceptually and phenomenally, ontologically dependent. There's a dependence there. The molecule depends on the parts, right? The emergent thing depends on the parts. So the interesting thing about social creatures is that the individual depends on the society, but the society also depends on the individual. So there's this mutual supervenience such that changes in the individual morality creates changes in the collective morality, but changes in the collective morality also create changes in the individual. Because if the collective morality is changing, the individuals, in order to, like, you don't want to be excommunicated. And so, to some extent, individuals will sacrifice their own morality to adopt the collective morality for maintaining cooperative benefits, access to the collective. So there's mutual supervenience going on between individuals and societies. And at the level of evolution, this is interesting because it creates complexity in the moral strategy. Like morality for independent creatures, morality is what's good for me and who cares about what's good for others because my evolution is based on me as an individual. But for collective creatures, morality expands, like the scope of the calculation expands. It's not just about what's good for me, it's about what's good for all of us, because if my neighbors have it bad, then it's going to end up bad for me as well. And this is stuff that has to, game theory and evolution, it iterates over thousands of generations. So it's like, well, if you have a very abusive selfish strategy, like you might get a short-term benefit, but it's going to hurt the collective, and in the long run your collective gets destroyed by the neighbor tribe because you have too much infighting. And so having more pro-social individual moralities creates a more powerful collective, better chance of existing. Pro-sociality wins in the long run. Hooray! So I think how I would describe these layers of morality is that there's social morality, which supervenes on individual morality. Individual morality supervenes on individual well-being. Individual well-being, it supervenes on collective well-being, interestingly enough. And then collective well-being supervenes on game theory. And then game theory supervenes on nature. And so this is the brute fact of existence, right? There's the is-ought gap. It's like morality is what we ought to do. And there's this confusion about how facts create oughtness. And, because under a paradigm of no free will, it's like the isness necessitates the oughtness, right? It's like the chain of a causation. It's like the ought is the next step in the chain of causation. It's like it is the case that we're at step A. And what ought to be is that we cause step B, right? A causes B, and then B causes C. And that ought chain goes all the way down because that's basically no free will. But the cool thing about game theory is it calculates what is optimal, right? And so it's like, maybe determinism is going to lead us off a cliff. As like, we've been programmed by our ancient ape-like tendencies. We have these tribal oughts within us, right? Determinism is guiding us to be tribal because that's what worked in the past. But we're at a point in time where tribalism is bad because we can nuke the planet. But evolution isn't smart enough. Determinism isn't smart enough. Like what we think we ought to do is wrong. And that's how game theory is useful. Game theory is useful because it shows us what we actually ought to do. And so basically you calculate that actually your tribal tendencies, they might have helped you exist in the past. They don't help you exist now. So tribalism in the modern age is bad. But just because you calculate does not necessarily mean that you follow it. So that's the tricky part.